dogs be chasing cars. In fact, scientists know that wolves, from which our dogs were domesticated, would often chase flintmobiles driven by cavemen across Cobblestone County in prehistoric times. To what end? Gary Larson depicted the ultimate outcome in his Far Side comic strip, where a dog has overturned such a captured automobile and then begins to have intercourse with it. An outcome not good for the dog and not good for the car. If you don't believe me, go ask a veterinarian, or an auto mechanic, or a member of the German Green Party. What's that, you say? Why an auto mechanic? Well, auto is actually short for automobile. Auto mechanic actually means car mechanic. What's that, you say? Why ask a German Green? This is what word scientists refer to as a metaphor. The dog is Germany's Green Party. The car is nuclear power. Germany's Green Party finally succeeded in shutting down Germany's last nuclear power plants. The dog finally caught the car. This happened in April of 2023. The last 3 German reactors stopped producing power. It no longer mattered how the Green Party predicted the atomic exit would unfold. It was all of a sudden real, and we could watch it play out. The very first thing that happened was that Germany immediately transitioned from being a net exporter of electricity to a net importer of electricity. Shutting down nuclear power plants was supposed to free up solar and wind production. According to German Greens, solar and wind were being constrained by all the nuclear power on the grid. If they could just get those last reactors off the grid, solar and wind could finally perform. This was a story told by German Greens to Canadian Greens, to Elizabeth May, the co-leader of our Canadian Green Party, when she attended COP28.
I've heard a lot of people, especially the German Greens, saying that nuclear energy is unreliable and a bad idea, but so is it renewable or not? Is it environmental or not? I don't know.
It's not.
Elizabeth May then repeated this story to Canadian Green Party members when asked about nuclear power in Canada.
The German Greens that I've seen here, they've taken nuclear energy totally out of their grid. They are no longer generating a single watt of electricity. A big bump in how much renewable energy was entering the grid. The nuclear being there was holding back renewables.
Until the last couple of years, any random Green Party member would have a hard time fact-checking this claim. But now this has changed. Now each of us have all the tools we need to interrogate stories like this. Online tools which monitor the energy mix of different countries. Electricity Maps is the easiest to use, although it only provides maximum information for the past 24 hours. Still, that 24 hours is enough. It's not only real-time data. It's not like we're in daylight and we're looking at Germany while it's their nighttime. You can get a fair comparison. And Germany's grid is perpetually dirty. They have energy storage. That's undoubtedly improving the situation, but the overall result is still a very bad one. Germany is always burning coal and gas. Ontario, by contrast, has a perpetually clean grid. Ontario is a net exporter of electricity. Ontario has a fleet of Canadian nuclear reactors called CANDU. This fleet of reactors allowed Ontario to shut down their last coal plant in 2014. In fact, some of the coal plant workers transitioned to work at the CANDU power plants.
So I worked at the Nanco generating station for 3 years. People knew about climate change, but in that community that I worked in, that was kind of like an attack on our livelihood. We used to tell ourselves, oh, you know what, those smog days in Toronto, that's not this coal plant. And keep in mind, we're talking about the biggest coal plant in North America. The government said, oh, we're going to close down all the coal plants. They said, you know what, we're going to shut down this coal plant, but nobody's going to lose their job. I was just appreciative to have the opportunity to make more money, become better trained, get a better job, and have that financial security that I wanted from not having it as a child and told myself that I would get.
Ontario and Germany chose between depending on nuclear power and intermittent energy sources. Ontario chose nuclear and was able to stop burning coal. Germany chose solar and wind and is now signaling they will extend their coal combustion past 2030 until 2038. Another online tool, intermittent.energy, is more complex but allows access to all historic data and a broader collection of data. What you'll notice first of all when looking at a history of Germany's energy mix is they always have been burning a heck of a lot of coal and gas. Germany, among green parties, is lauded for their deployment of solar and wind, and it was indeed a good thing that Germany deployed all that solar and wind and helped drive down the cost. But Germany's grid has never been clean. It was dirty before, and Germany's grid is still dirty now. Ontario's grid was dirty before and is now clean. Ontario's coal exit is the biggest decarbonization of an electrical grid in North America. Germany versus Ontario. Dirty grid, clean grid. CO2 per kilowatt hour, 416 grams, 76 grams. Coal exit, 2038, 2014. For all the billion of euro Germany has spent on renewables, those renewables have basically served to replace nuclear power. Germany replaced one low-carbon source of power for another, instead of focusing on replacing coal and gas. And yet, these German renewables can't even replicate the service nuclear once provided. If they could replicate nuclear's reliability, then Germany would still be a net exporter of electricity. Germany shuts down their last nuclear power plants. Germany starts importing electricity immediately. And who is the biggest supplier of electricity to Germany? Nuclear-powered France. Germany actually imports quite a bit and exports quite a bit. And all the while this is happening, the cost of electricity is fluctuating. Julien Jameau created a scatter plot to help make sense of these fluctuations. Germany exports cheap electricity and imports expensive electricity. This was December of 2023, when Germany was a net exporter. Strong winds across Europe, lots of coal burning. What is the value of this excess electricity that Germany was exporting? Some low, some zero, that is electricity of zero value, and some at negative value. Electricity you pay people to take from you. Germany was exporting the most electricity when it had the least value. Germany was importing electricity when it cost the most. Here is France compared to Germany in May of 2023, the month after Germany shut down their last nuclear power plants. Nuclear France is almost always exporting high-value electricity. Solar, wind, and coal Germany is almost always importing high-value electricity. But look at the moments when Germany is exporting electricity. At the moments Germany is exporting the most, the furthest leftward red dots, the values are between 0 and negative. Germany is paying others to take its electricity. In fact, Germany made essentially no profit from their electricity exports. Never mind all the money Germany paid to import electricity, if you only look at the German export of electricity, where it was a mix of low value and zero value and negative value, it all balances out to no profit at all. This did not happen until Germany shut down their last nuclear power plants. That was when their electricity export value vanished. I'm creating this video in hope that fellow Green Party members will poke around on these online tools and see for themselves the state of Germany's grid, since Germany's renewable program is what many Green parties around the world are seeking to replicate. I'm a Canadian Green, and very soon the Green Party of Canada is going to review 2 nuclear power policy proposals. Colin Griffith's proposal on nuclear power calls for Green Party of Canada to embrace nuclear power. My own proposal, withdraw opposition to nuclear power, will purge existing anti-nuclear policies from our party. Policies which, if ever enacted, would destroy Canada's ability to continue operating existing nuclear power plants. For example, here is one such Canadian Green Party policy which we have already officially adopted. It includes the institution of a global ban on the mining and export of uranium. That one policy alone, if ever enacted, would utterly destroy Canada's contribution to the fight against global warming. Canadian uranium is helping nations all over the world decarbonize, and it is Canadian mined uranium which offsets 1/3 of all Canadian emissions across all sectors. You've heard how electricity production is just one part of the global warming problem. We've got other ways we emit CO2, like burning gas in stoves and stuff like that. Well, nuclear power is offsetting 1/3 of everything. That is terrible policy. That is existing Green Party of Canada policy It's embarrassing. Let's get rid of it. If you're a Canadian member of the Green Party, I encourage you to participate in our democratic process by reviewing these policies and voting on them. If you're not a member of Canada's Green Party, you might be wondering, why not just leave the party, Gord? There is a precedent for what us pro-nuclear Greens are trying to do, and that's Finland's Green Party. In 2022, the Finland Green Party endorsed nuclear power. I think this is possible in Canada too because Canadian Green Party supporters have been mostly unaware of one piece of information. Nuclear power is the lowest carbon source of energy on planet Earth. In fact, the life cycle emissions from wind power are double that of nuclear power. The life cycle emissions from solar panels are 6 times that of nuclear power. Uranium is so incredibly energy dense that the mining of uranium, the construction of the nuclear power plant, the maintenance of the plant, it all works out to be half of wind power's carbon footprint and 1/6 of solar's for the same amount of electricity generated. Do Canadians know this? Of course we don't, but my fellow Green Party members are particularly unaware of it.
Unfortunately, the German Greens have gotten the German government to commit to shutting down their reactors.
And we've seen leadership from the provincial government of Ontario shutting down coal-fired power plants. That's the number one thing we need to do.
Of course, it was the nuclear fleet in Ontario that supplied 90% of the additional power needed to replace coal. If you only listened to Green Party leadership, you would never have heard that nuclear is low carbon, never mind the lowest carbon. You'd never know nuclear decarbonized Ontario's grid. Elizabeth May campaigned against all Ontario nuclear refurbishments and upgrades. Had she succeeded, would Ontario still be burning coal today, like Germany? Only 27% of Canadian Greens think that nuclear power is at least on par with solar. The vast majority have either been misinformed or have come to this assumption by our leadership's constant dismissal of nuclear power.
We know that the solutions to the climate crisis lie not in nuclear power, but in renewable energy.
It's not terribly reliable. It's hugely expensive capital cost, very few jobs created, and it only produces electricity. And it's about 14 years from when you put the project forward to when it's built, and it's famous for cost overruns. The risk of accidents, long-lived nuclear waste that have to be kept out of the biosphere for over 250,000 years, the risk of nuclear proliferation for use in military terms. You don't even have to look at those issues for nuclear to fail.
It's not like Elizabeth May ever said, we know nuclear power is low carbon, but here's why we oppose it.
I'm embarrassed about how much of the Canadian delegation is people from the nuclear industry. There are a lot of people shilling for things, and the nuclear industry is here big time.
57% of Canadians who intend to vote Green want to either shut down all existing reactors immediately or keep existing ones operating, but never build any new ones. I think that if 73% of Green supporters who are currently unaware nuclear power is the lowest carbon source of energy were to become aware, somehow, I don't know, maybe by watching this video, then a majority of Greens would stop opposing nuclear power. Not all of them, just a majority, just like the rest of Canada, just like the rest of the world.
Yet another sales pitch from the same old nuclear power pushers in Canada.
What else could it have been? UAE hosted COP28. They're the first Middle Eastern country to sign and ratify the Paris Agreement, and they have just joined the nuclear power community with their Barakah nuclear power plant. UAE was not shy about this, proclaiming how they now had 3 of their 4 reactors at Barakah producing low-carbon electricity. Here's the carbon intensity of UAE's grid dropping as a result, easily competing with Germany. As they decide to build more reactors in the future, that trajectory can continue right down to join the other low-carbon nuclear grids: France, Sweden, Switzerland, and Ontario. That's not to say United Arab Emirates has a clean grid. They're a petrostate. UAE burns gas to produce most of their electricity, just like my home province of Alberta. But they have a clear path forward. There's nothing complicated about replacing gas with nuclear. Me and my home province of Alberta hope to follow a similar path. Germany's carbon emissions also dropped in 2023, but not because nuclear freed up solar and wind. German electricity is now so expensive that they're facing deindustrialization. In 2022, 16% of surveyed German industrial companies plan to expand abroad rather than in Germany. In 2023, after Germany's last reactors were shut off and Germany became a net importer of electricity, it increased. 32% of German industrial companies no longer want to expand domestically. Industry requires energy. The cost of electricity is making German manufacturing uncompetitive. In contrast, here's Ontario, with enough reliable clean electricity to power its own manufacturing sector and help Manitoba's and the USA's as well. Ontario manufacturing is competitive, in part, because Ontario's electricity is affordable. Ontario didn't oversaturate their grid with unreliable energy sources, which drive up the cost of electricity. You've heard how inexpensive solar panels are. Here's something you've seen before. Inexpensive solar and wind undercutting nuclear power. Nuclear is shown to be expensive because some nuclear builds around the world, most prominently in Georgia, have gone way over budget. There's no reason to build more nuclear. Just do what's cheapest. Solar and wind. It's all good, man. Now I'm showing the cost of Canadian nuclear power. Ontario has been continually upgrading its fleet of CANDU reactors, an operation actually more challenging than building reactors from scratch. Tens of billions of dollars. The cost of those upgrades is included in the cost of Ontario Nuclear. Remember, those upgrades increased reactor output and let Ontario stop burning coal in 2014. Ontario's supply chain is amazing. They know how to build nuclear because they never stopped doing it. Canadians have been refurbishing Canadian reactors with new Canadian manufactured parts for years. Here's the cost of wind in Ontario, according to the Ontario Energy Board, the same source I'm using for the cost of nuclear in Ontario. Why does wind cost more in Ontario than in California? Does the wind blow less? Nope. Actually, Ontario is windier than California. But the anti-nuclear organizations who cite Lazard's LCOE, levelized cost of electricity, don't include firming costs, which are in the 2023 Lazard LCOE report. Finally, in 2023, Lazard included firming costs. Firming costs are already baked into OEB prices. Canadian nuclear is cheaper than California solar and wind, cheaper than Ontario solar wind. It is, holy cow, look at the cost of Ontario solar! Solar panels produce far less electricity in Ontario than they do in California. Geographically, the average capacity factor of solar power in Canada is 6%. In Ontario, it is 20%. In California, it is 28%. This is why so many Canadian utilities are considering nuclear power. It isn't some sort of scam. They just know that the levelized cost of electricity isn't the end of the story. If they don't deliver reliable electricity, people are going to die. Including firming cost is the cutting edge of the public conversation. Before 2023, everyone was still citing Lazard, but Lazard just didn't include firming in their report. Going back even further, people didn't even include capacity factors in their comparisons. For decades, we've been hearing about solar and wind deployments in units that implied they would be running at 100% capacity. We can accurately use units like that to describe hydropower and nuclear and coal and gas and geothermal because those are reliable sources of electricity, which can deliver full capacity when needed. To truly depend on solar and wind, we'd need to deploy a lot of them. In fact, solar and wind are so overbuilt in Germany that if their solar and wind hardware could operate at full capacity 24/7, Germany would have an amazing abundance of energy and would be exporting all the time. Yet, Germany can't overbuild enough solar and wind to finally ditch coal. It becomes increasingly difficult to incentivize participants without steadily increasing the subsidies. If you've overbuilt solar and wind, it can provide lots of electricity at a given moment. But then so does everybody else, and the market is temporarily flooded. The selling price of electricity is low. The value is low. Maybe it's even negative. Every solar and wind installation competes with every other one. The more that are built, the less value each one of them can provide. If you've built a wind farm, the value that your already existing wind farm can provide is diminished by the construction of the next wind farm. You might personally get a set amount of profit from the utility, but the actual value you're providing, the actual usefulness to society, that's diminished with every additional deployment. Here's Green Party of Canada's 2019 plan for transitioning completely to renewable energy sources. It relies almost entirely on low-capacity energy sources, solar and wind. We also burn some biomass, and we keep our existing hydropower. That is a lot of unreliable electricity. In fact, I can't even imagine that many solar panels being deployed.
We have this extraordinary little tiny example in Nelson, BC of a solar utility based on people putting solar panels in backyards.
Nelson, BC in no way reflects any aspect of the Green Party of Canada plan. The city runs on hydropower, including their very own hydropower facility. They're connected to BC's grid, and BC is also powered by hydropower. BC has an incredibly, wonderfully clean grid, but it's not because there's a bunch of solar panels on people's houses. It is a completely different thing to supplement your energy needs with intermittent energy than it is to be completely dependent on it. Here's the output from Nelson's community solar farm, stacked against how much electricity was needed and produced. This reflects our recent experience in Alberta, where wind was barely producing anything during a cold snap. At some times, it was producing literally no electricity at all, and the cost of electricity was at its highest. We started to receive grid warnings. And these are the energy sources we should pivot Canada to depend on, like Germany did? I mean, look at it out there. It's cold. This is not a cold snap. This is just normal Calgary winter. But we need to keep the lights on in Calgary at all times. We need dependable electricity. Here's another way of looking at it. In Germany, when does solar and wind deliver the least energy? When it's the coldest, and the demand for energy is the highest. What brings the highest value are electricity sources which produce when solar and wind are not. If your city or your province or your country has that, then you export the most valuable electricity. And it's not just the most valuable because of cost in dollars, it's actually the most valuable to society.
Putting solar panels in backyards, a really strong national electricity grid. Pumped storage is perfectly good.
Germany has energy storage, quite a bit of it. Germany does a little bit of everything. They've got transmission between themselves and 9 neighboring countries, energy storage, geothermal, biomass. In fact, Germany burns wood shipped all the way from Canada to produce a little bit of their electricity. Who ships wood pellets across the ocean to burn them for electricity? Anybody concerned with global warming? Here's how Germany would have advanced their decarbonization efforts if they'd kept their nuclear fleet online. They'd have gone from 50% decarbonized electricity to 74%. At the moment Germany's last reactors were shut down, only 25% of Germans thought it was a good idea. The German coalition government was divided over this. The liberal Free Democrats called for nuclear power plants to be kept on standby at the very least. Since the last reactors were shut off, German Greens have slipped in the polls to a new low, not experienced since 2018. When Green parties oppose nuclear power, we're alienating what should be our core constituency, pro-technology climate hawks. That's me, an alienated member of the Green Party of Canada. Since Colin and I have put forward our proposals, we know for a fact many Greens feel the exact same way. Most have already left the party and are wondering why I was contacting them, but not all. Nuclear power makes sense from an economic perspective, from a climate perspective, and from a political perspective. So why does my Green Party position itself as the party fighting climate change while simultaneously opposing nuclear power? Of course, Green voters don't all think nuclear is high carbon. Many are aware it's low carbon and have other objections. When Elizabeth May is asked about nuclear power, she does a pretty good job of first avoiding the concept of grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour, but then listing off many popular concerns. My own biggest concern is uranium mining. We left environmental contamination at mined-out sites. There are millions of tons of uranium tailings. Most of this was produced before Canada stopped converting uranium into weapons-grade plutonium for export to the United States, and it's been sitting there since. It wasn't until 1965 that Canada's nuclear program finally became a peaceful one. This goes all the way back to 1942, when Canada helped supply America with nuclear material to build Fat Man and Little Boy. The further back you go, the more terrible the environmental practices involved in uranium mining get. This is not unique to Canada, but regardless whether we were haphazardly mining uranium to help America during the Cold War or haphazardly mining uranium to try and help defeat Nazi Germany, a mess is a mess. We need to fight for monitoring, including specifically the monitoring of uranium and water supplies, and fight for remediation, and fight for compensation. Should uranium mining be stopped in Canada? Should we halt our current exports of uranium? I don't think we could or should do that. Worldwide, every year, Canadian uranium offsets 300 million tons of greenhouse gas emissions. Also, uranium isn't just found on its own. Uranium and thorium are found with rare earth elements and other critical minerals. Does the Green Party want Canada to import all minerals needed for wind turbines and electric vehicles? We need to figure out optimal solutions for harvesting all mineral resources. And we're going to need to help push for a development of some mines. In fact, it is the endorsements we grant some mining practices that gives our criticism of the most potentially harmful practices some weight. I don't think we can just say no. I think we need to identify what is the best and what is the worst, push for the best while fighting the worst. Only saying no means that most people are not going to take our objections seriously. This applies to the wide variety of nuclear technologies, and it applies to the minerals needed for all clean energy options. The next criticism of nuclear I'd like to touch on is weapons proliferation. I think nuclear war continues to be the most likely means by which our civilization might end. If global warming is to destroy humanity, I don't think it'll be directly. My guess is global warming will make conflicts more likely, and it will eventually be nuclear war that turns out to be global warming's mechanism for our destruction. But nuclear war is not going to happen because of civilian nuclear power. Civilian power reactors do not produce weapons-grade plutonium. They never have, not once. Civilian reactors produce plutonium, which is reactor-grade. Military reactors produce plutonium, which is weapons-grade. And no one on Earth can convert reactor-grade plutonium into weapons-grade plutonium. Weapons-grade plutonium needs to be created as such from scratch. The process is irreversible, like toasting a piece of bread. In fact, the process is actually called toasting. If you burn a piece of bread in your toaster, you cannot unburn it. It's only good for compost. Reactor-grade plutonium is only useful as fuel for reactors. To understand why, we need to talk about elements and isotopes.
Modern physics and chemistry have reduced the complexity of the sensible world to an astonishing simplicity. 3 units put together in different patterns make essentially everything. A proton has a positive electrical charge. A neutron is electrically neutral. And an electron, an equal negative electrical charge. Since every atom is electrically neutral, the number of protons in the nucleus must equal the number of electrons far away in the electron cloud. The protons and neutrons together make up the nucleus of the atom. If you're an atom and you have just 1 proton, you're hydrogen. 2 protons, helium, 3 lithium, all the way to 92 protons, in which case your name is uranium.
For any given element, the number of protons must remain the same, but the number of neutrons may vary. The atomic weight of an atom is the number of protons plus the number of neutrons. Natural uranium may contain 142, 143, or 146 neutrons. That means uranium has 3 natural isotopes, U-234, U-235, and U-238. Some elements, such as tin, have a great number of natural isotopes. Others, such as aluminum, have only 1. Most isotopes are stable. They would never spontaneously change their atomic structure. But some isotopes are constantly changing. They're busy being radioactive. Given enough time, this radium-88 isotope will shed energy and change. This is how isotopes in the Earth itself emit radiation. So there's different isotopes of uranium and different isotopes of plutonium, whatever. How different can an isotope be? 2 billion years ago, Earth had natural nuclear reactors. This was because 2 billion years ago, there was a little bit more uranium-235 in natural deposits of uranium. About 3% more. It was enough of a difference that natural bodies of uranium ore would undergo a nuclear chain reaction and do everything we do in our modern nuclear power plants. Everything except have their heat harnessed to generate electricity. We deliberately contaminate nuclear waste with plutonium-240 when the fuel is being consumed in our civilian power reactors. It is a process like overcooking food, and it can't be undone. 19% or more of the plutonium in our nuclear waste is plutonium-240. 240 makes the plutonium itself in nuclear waste useless as a weapon. If you separated out all the plutonium from nuclear waste, you would have reactor-grade plutonium and not weapons-grade plutonium. Has anyone campaigning against nuclear power ever mentioned plutonium-240 to you? It never came up? Just like how nuclear power is the planet Earth's single lowest carbon source of electricity, and that just never came up? The last objection I'd like to comment on is nuclear waste. My own introduction to nuclear power came from watching some Google Tech Talk videos in 2008. The videos which caught my interest were about how we could use a thorium fuel cycle to avoid the creation of nuclear waste that remains radioactive for so long. This was hundreds of thousands of years for conventional nuclear waste versus 300 years. The thing is, if we did this, if Canada did this, it would all be for the sake of recycling nuclear waste inside a reactor, as opposed to both inside and outside a reactor. It is a reactor with its own ongoing recycling process, enabled by liquid fuel as opposed to conventional solid fuel. Why is it so important that it happen inside a reactor as opposed to outside a reactor? Because we could be 100% efficient. Absolutely no wasted fuel. All efficient products segregated, ready for industrial use, and no plutonium in the waste stream, which is itself just another inefficiency. We can recycle nuclear waste now, without using the thorium fuel cycle. Not 100% efficient, but a meaningful step forward. We can get far more energy out of the waste we've already produced. And you know what? Green leadership and their anti-nuclear consultants just don't care. We could do it cleaner, we could do it better, less mining, less waste for the same amount of low-carbon electricity. Nuclear is already the single lowest carbon source of electricity, but it could be even lower. It could be almost literally carbon-free. Instead of seriously exploring the concept of recycling nuclear fuel, I've instead seen Green Party leadership only listen to those mischaracterizing how it would work and then repeating such disinformation to our members and on the floor of Parliament. I've heard that plutonium would be chemically separated from the rest of the spent fuel. It will not. Never mind that the plutonium itself is reactor grade and not weapons grade. But it is completely untrue to say plutonium would be separated. It won't. Green Party leadership bounces their nuclear questions off of Dr. Gordon Edwards. Here is Dr. Gordon Edwards' thoughts on the subject of waste recycling nuclear reactors. It may be one day, after all the power reactors have been shut down and folks have weaned themselves off nuclear power, some version of these concepts may be useful for waste management purposes, but not now. To do it now would just be unleashing the dogs of nuclear expansionism, leading to a mad flurry of activity the whole world will end up regretting. He typed that, he never said it, so I don't know what his actual inflection was. So waste-destroying reactors might be okay, but to do the exact same thing while producing electricity, carbon-free electricity, well, that would unleash the dogs of nuclear expansionism. They're not seriously evaluating recycling. They're just objecting to nuclear power. Our blanket opposition to nuclear power keeps us from having informative discussions. Here's another anti-nuclear campaigner, Dr. Susan O'Donnell, speaking at a Green Party of Canada's nuclear roundtable.
One of the interesting things about this MOU is that it actually binds the parties to only talking about the benefits of these technologies, to only talking about the economic and environmental benefits, and not to talk about the risks.
That is not at all a true statement. I challenged Dr. O'Donnell that that was not true, that the Memorandum of Understanding was not a bloody gag order. She conceded. You're correct. I misspoke in the roundtable. I wasn't trying to imply that it was binding people into silence. I should have used different words. Thanks for pointing that out. This anti-nuclear echo chamber is why Green Party supporters are least likely to know that nuclear is low carbon. Both sides are not being presented. Obvious mistakes and omissions are not being caught. You've said we don't need nuclear power, we can shut down all the reactors. What if we do that and renewables fail to deliver? Are we not going to burn a lot more fossil fuel?
No, of course not. What? Don't ask me such a stupid question.
Here's perhaps the most famous anti-nuclear campaigner in the world.
You know, they say nuclear power is the answer to global warming. That's absolute rot. They mine the uranium with trucks nearly as large as this church, pumping out CO2 continuously. Huge amounts of fossil fuel are used to mine the uranium, then have to crush it into a fine powder.
Who Elizabeth May saw speak in 2007 in Regina.
How do you dig up uranium? Fossil fuel, oil. Oh, what does oil do when it's burnt? Causes carbon dioxide, right? Carbon dioxide is responsible for 50% of global warming, yet the nuclear industry, in its wickedness, will say nuclear power's clean and green, no emissions, right? How many times do you hear that? I don't believe in freedom of speech when scientists lie.
And who our own party's nuclear critic hosted on her podcast in 2023.
Dr. Helen Caldicott, thank you so much for joining us.
How do you dig up uranium? You have to dig up millions of tons of rock and ore using fossil fuel. You have to mine millions of tons of uranium, huge fossil fuel. So the nuclear industry lies. They produce a large carbon footprint and global warming.
Those emissions are already factored in. That's the point of life cycle emissions. It's all included. Still, with all the life cycle emissions included, nuclear is the single lowest carbon source of energy on planet Earth. Not just when the plants are running, the whole life cycle. Dr. Helen Caldicott was misleading Elizabeth May and the rest of her Canadian audience. Here's Dr. Helen Caldicott, hosted by Australian Green Party candidate Mandy Nolan.
We've got to broaden how we look at zero emissions to look at the entire footprint.
Process of uranium mining, enrichment, building the reactor, decommissioning the reactor, storing the radioactive waste produces huge amounts of CO2.
Dr. Caldicott keeps asserting that nuclear is high carbon because no one ever thought about the mining footprint. You had a TV appearance that sparked an argument with someone in the Guardian newspaper over nuclear power.
That revolting little man.
Can we get into that? This was shortly after another anti-nuclear activist and journalist, George Monbiot, had switched sides from being anti-nuclear to pro-nuclear.
What are we trying to achieve here? Why are we pursuing, come what may, one particular technology, whether or not it's the most appropriate one for dealing with this, whether or not it's the most efficient one for dealing with the existential crisis which we face here on Earth at the moment, and blocking out, before we've even been able to discuss it, a whole suite of technologies which could be extremely useful to us.
Coal is hundreds of times more dangerous than nuclear power.
And Monbiot had debated Caldicott on television.
This is the biggest medical conspiracy and cover-up in the history of medicine, George.
I don't think you could dismiss the UN Scientific Committee as being part of the nuclear industry. I don't think you can dismiss the very large amount of data on the... Sorry, you're saying you would dismiss the UN Scientific Committee as being part of the nuclear industry?
Yes, let me tell you, George.
Well, then the mind boggles. Where does this end?
The mind does boggle.
Them and the UN Scientific Committee and the IAEA and... I mean, who else is involved in this conspiracy? We need to know.
And Monbiot had written an article in The Guardian asserting that anti-nuclear campaigns were frequently dishonest. The anti-nuclear movement to which I once belonged has misled the world about the impact of radiation on human health. The claims we made were ungrounded in science, unsupportable when challenged, and wildly wrong. We have done other people and ourselves a terrible disservice. Helen Caldicott, the world's foremost anti-nuclear campaigner, has made some striking statements about the dangers of radiation. I asked for sources. Caldicott's response has profoundly shaken me. None were scientific publications. None contained sources for the claims she'd made.
Can we get into that?
George Monbiot, God help us, said after Fukushima he's become pro-nuclear. He's either got a cerebral tumour or he's had a psychotic breakdown. That's my clinical diagnosis. Is he being paid? Because many people have said to me, is he being paid? Now, I know he's independently wealthy because I checked up, but I do wonder, you always have to follow the money. Something fishy's going on.
Well, these things get so personal. I think at the end of the day, everyone's just trying to do the right thing.
A lot of people have vested interests.
Isn't this a little weird?
Well, no, but you have to wonder what their motivation is, don't you?
Well, he's probably just trying to report the truth, right? He could...
Well, if it is, he doesn't know what the hell he's talking about, and he has no right to be saying this because it's not true.
Well, it is good to get both sides on camera. Here's Dr. Helen Caldicott, hosted by our party's nuclear critic, Sarah Gabriel Barron.
If you look at the Fukushima data, they've been looking at children under the age of 18 at the time of the accident, and there is a large number of people who at that age were young who've developed thyroid cancer.
A wave of thyroid cancers did happen at Chernobyl, but not at Fukushima. Children were screened across Japan and additional cancers were detected. However, they were detected everywhere the screening took place, not just at Fukushima. Not more at Fukushima, like one would expect. They were detected uniformly across Japan. The point of this was to get a baseline to compare Fukushima against. According to the United Nations, no adverse health effects among Fukushima residents have been documented that could be directly attributed to radiation exposure from the accident, nor are any expected to be detectable in the future. Although a substantial number of thyroid cancers have been detected among exposed children, the increase in thyroid cancers is the result of ultrasensitive screening procedures that have revealed the prevalence of thyroid abnormalities not previously recognized in the population and is not a result of radiation exposure. Caldicott was misleading our Green Party's nuclear critic and the rest of Sarah's podcast audience. Ever since I started learning about nuclear power in 2008, I've been trying to hear from both sides. I still try to hear from both sides. I don't think Green leadership has been trying. Please support Canadian Green Party's policy proposals for nuclear power. There are two. One is mine. It's for us to stop our blanket opposition to nuclear power. It isn't even pro-nuclear at all. It just strips out our existing anti-nuclear policies. We can review projects on a case-by-case basis. I don't think that is too much to ask. The other one is called On Nuclear Power, submitted by Colin Griffiths. It is overtly pro-nuclear. I support his motion, and I hope other climate hawk Greens will consider doing the same. Both of these proposals have received the most comments and the most follows of any policy proposals this cycle. They're visible to everyone. You don't have to be a member of the Green Party to inspect them. Look at the video description. I will be providing hyperlinks to these policies. I'm looking forward to participating in the Green Party's AGM on February 24th and 25th. I used to volunteer quite a bit for the Green Party because I was concerned about global warming. That is something I would like to do again, but it can't be counterproductive. So long as the Green Party of Canada opposes nuclear power, it will remain a counterproductive force in the battle against climate change. If you want to discuss this in private, I'm gordonmcdowell@gmail.com. Otherwise, leave a comment on this video and I'll be happy to respond to any questions you have. Please consider sharing this video. If you'd like a copy to post somewhere else, but don't know how to rip the video, just contact me and I will send you a link. Thank you for your time and hopefully your support. Leave a comment with any questions.